The Holy Gospel according to John, the 10th chapter. Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
It is the fourth Sunday of Easter, and as we do every year, we arrive at the Good Shepherd. It is a pattern that becomes almost so routine that sometimes you wonder, what more can you say? We're going to read the 23rd Psalm. You're going to hear a portion of Jesus' monologue about the Good Shepherd from the 10th chapter of the Gospel of John. And probably the hymns will have something to say about the relationship between us as God's sheep and Jesus as our shepherd. It's kind of a pattern. Seminary used to joke about this. That was a long time ago. And I still sometimes wonder. We shift from the resurrection appearances of Jesus to some experiences of the character of Jesus. Now, the quality of Good Shepherd is a really positive one, even for folks who have no concept of sheep and shepherds. We don't really see them all around very much. They're not part of our normal life as they would have been for the Israelites who heard these stories first. And yet there is still this very caring and pastoral quality to it. We like the idea that the Lord is my shepherd and that all kinds of good things will happen even when the world around us seems to be falling apart. We often think about the Good Shepherd when we come to funerals, and we start with the 23rd Psalm. It's one of the most requested psalms that people have. And we like the idea that Jesus is sort of taking care of us, that we have a place, and that Jesus is willing to protect us from the evil that is around us, that he is good for us, good on our behalf. But as I looked at this material this week, I started to think, where will I go with it? And the first thing that popped into my head was sort of a strange thing. I said to myself, what good is a dead shepherd? I mean, the hired hand ran away and the wolves got to the sheep. The shepherd lay down, the wolves killed him, and then they got to the sheep. It didn't seem to really matter whether you ran away or whether you stayed down and you let yourself be killed. The sheep were still in trouble from the wolves. And then I was reading one of the commentaries, and Tom Wright asked the same question, what good is a dead shepherd? And he goes on to explain what value that is, but we're not going to go there for the moment. We're just going to leave that one hanging there. And then I asked myself, why does Jesus say this particular monologue at this particular point in the gospel? What's he contrasting? Because typically when Jesus says something positive, there's something else going on around it that he is saying no to. Usually his yes is in response to something else. So if you flip back a chapter to the 9th chapter of the Gospel of John, you read the story of a healing of a blind man. 7 scenes in which a blind man comes from not being able to see visibly to standing before the very authorities of Israel and saying, Jesus is the Christ. And the reaction of the authorities of Israel is to kick him out of the synagogue. The very ones who should have been responsible for the faith and the faithfulness, caring for the very people that were downtrodden and who had somehow come up the ladder, who should have been including people, not excluding people, acted in a very self-righteous way. And I think what Jesus is looking at is the way that the Pharisees and other religious authorities looked out for their own interests rather than the interests of those they were to care for. Jesus is saying the bad shepherds are the ones who are more concerned with themselves than with the sheep. The ones who are looking for the opportunity to take advantage of their positions rather than being concerned about the sheep. The ones who are trying to enrich themselves at the cost of the sheep. The bad shepherds are those kind of shepherds. In contrast, says Jesus, I am the good shepherd. Or as Raymond Brown, famous Gospel of John scholar, says, the model shepherd. That if you want to know what a shepherd is supposed to look like, one of these people who leads God's people, who shepherds God's flock, it is the shepherd who looks out for the interests of the flock, not himself. The model shepherd is the one who is even willing to give up his life to rescue the flock. Because perhaps the blood of the shepherd scares off the wolves after they've been satisfied by chowing down on the shepherd. But somehow the shepherd that Jesus is demonstrating is a shepherd who cares about the other and who does it willingly, not by force. No one said you have to lay down your life for the sheep. He simply does that because it is what is good. And he's not interested in scattering sheep that don't seem to fit in, but rather in gathering sheep. Even those who are not of this particular flock, and in that case the people of Israel, but who are outside that flock, who are going to be called in by the shepherd's voice. This shepherd cares about more than this group, but about all the people that are out there somewhere. Jesus, the model shepherd, is contrasted to those shepherds who are self-serving, for he is other-serving. He is looking out for the best interest of the sheep, not of himself. He is a model shepherd. And in fact, what's interesting about using Jesus as the model shepherd is not only that he is a contrast to bad shepherds, but that he is a model for how we ought to shepherd when it's our opportunity. He becomes the model of how we ought to think about our responsibility over against people that are in our care, that we are responsible for. Whether it's a position of leadership in an organization, or if we become politically involved and somehow have positions of authority in which we're supposed to figure out a way to share the resources with everyone. Whatever the role might be, Jesus says this is the model. And in fact, in John, when he writes the letter, says we ought to lay down our lives for others just as Jesus laid his life down for us. That is how we know what love is. When our lives become sacrificial lives, maybe not martyrs, but nevertheless lives that demonstrate care for you before it demonstrates care for me. And that when we as communities begin to think that way, when we operate as a community that concerns itself about the people beyond ourselves, whether it's the sharing of our space or our resources or the goodies we have, whatever it might be, or even the parking lot, which has apparently become a big truck location for people, the model is still about serving rather than being served. Jesus is the good shepherd because he embodies the qualities that God desires for one who cares for others. He is the model for then and for now. And he invites us to become shepherds, good shepherds, for the sake of the world. Amen.